Good day and welcome to The Fold. Today, with me are a few guests. Her Worship, Andrea Horwath, the Mayor of the City of Hamilton, and Catherine Kalinowski, the Chief Operating Officer of Good Shepherd here in Hamilton. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, Andrea, you and I go back a long way. I think I had hair. And
I had hair too.
Yeah, but I think yours was a different color maybe or something like that. But it was a long way. And you really, what was your connection or memories of your connection with Good Shepherd and working with us in the past, particularly when you were, I think McQuestion was the first time you and I got together to work together, and then Housing Help Center and a few other ones that we worked as collaborators in our community in terms of making things happen.
Absolutely. And thank you, Brother Richard, for the invitation. And thank you for starting the conversation with memories, because the Good Shepherd has been doing such great work in this city for such a long time. And notwithstanding the hair or no hair conversation, what's true is the city wouldn't be the same if it wasn't for the work that the Good Shepherd has done on so many levels. And when I think back to those first days when I was introduced to you and to the Good Shepherd, it was around the AIDS crisis, if I'm not mistaken. And the Good Shepherd was a one local organization that stood up and said, people need our care. They need our help. They need dignity in a disease that is tragically taking lives. And the Good Shepherd's going to step up and be that place of solace and of care for people that were dealing with AIDS. And I can tell you, one of my friends died of that disease, and being neither here nor there, however, to say, I know very personally how much what you were doing then meant to families and to individuals. It was something that was very stigmatizing, if you will, but that's what the Good Shepherd does. It helps people in need and steps up when others turn away.
Yeah. I remember those early days and some of the challenges with acceptance and recognizing that we were often going to a place where no one else had been and nobody knew what to do. I know from my own experience personally, and I've shared this with others, but when we first started working with people with HIV and AIDS, one of the first things that happened to me was that I got fired by my dentist.
Oh.
Because he was concerned about the fact that somehow or another I would contract AIDS and give it to his patients. It was a hard time, but it was, I think for me, a very blessed time in terms of dealing with people who were dying of the disease, and they were both men and women and young people. So I know that what made a difference in our community for so many people. And we were able to get through that crisis and continue to provide housing and supports to people with HIV in our community.
And now it's curable.
Yeah, it's pretty curable now. Yeah,
pretty much. We've had. I think we had the first person cured of HIV not that long ago.
That's true. Yeah, so it was really a challenging time, but I think today we also continue to see those challenges in so many different faces. So, from your perspective, what would you say are some of the challenges that we're dealing with today as a city? And what are you hearing most from the residents of our community?
Well, those are a little bit different, actually, in terms of the what I'm hearing and what I think is what I think some of the biggest concerns are. I can tell you that the affordability crisis writ large is a big problem in our city. And I say writ large because it's affecting so many different people, seniors, tenants, young people, people who work, people who aren't working. I mean, it's really the housing affordability crisis is serious. And we all know that a stable place to live is what makes a difference in terms of your ability to have success in life, right? And so have your children be able to have a stable place where they can ensure that their education is solid and they're not moving around constantly, et cetera. And so affordability and housing affordability particularly. But of course, the lack of affordable housing in terms of social housing and those kinds of resources that people should be able to rely on are also lacking. And so we have a lack of affordable housing. We have a lack of supportive housing so that people who need supports to to be able to thrive in a home, that's not available to them. And so, who are those people? So, this is the other part of the crisis that we're in. We have a homelessness crisis. We have people who are unhoused. That number continues to grow. Those people continue to, that group of people continues to become larger and larger. That tragedy continues to increase in our community. We have people struggling in our community, both on the streets and off, with addictions, with untreated mental health challenges, and those are things that combined put us in a very challenging time for the city. And cities across the country are experiencing the exact same thing. And this is a national crisis. It's not just a Hamilton crisis. It's not just an Ontario crisis. It is a national crisis, and that's a big piece of what we're seeing. When I talk to people, what do they see? I mean, this is a big piece for everyday folks too. They're concerned about it. As you know, there was a lot of issue around encampments, and I'm not going to sugarcoat that. I mean, it was people were very frustrated in that regard, and there continues to be worry about people who are in such bad shape on the streets, and what that does in terms of their own well-being, their own ability to survive, really, and then the surrounding community and the impacts on surrounding community.
Yeah, I would also say to you, one of the things that we're seeing in our group, particularly some of the people we were privileged to serve, is the rising number of families that are homeless, and the rising number of seniors that we're seeing in our shelters. It's people think it doesn't affect them, but really sometimes it's just one paycheck away. And we've said this for years, but it's one paycheck away. But it's actually, in some cases, it's more and more, can I buy groceries or can I pay the rent?
Food insecurity is a big issue. Food insecurity.
I was going to say it was interesting to me that your initial discussion focused on stigma attached to HIV and AIDS, but it's interesting to me as you talk about the crisis of homelessness and the toxic drug supply and all the effects of those circumstances is really connected to the notion of stigma too. And I wonder how we combat the stigma and demythologize the experience of homelessness and poverty and so on in order to drive solutions the way it happened with HIV and AIDS.
Mm-hmm. And I think we are, and you're a big part of this as well. The Good Shepherd definitely is a big part of this, the driving solutions part, right? I mean, there are solutions. There's no one solution. There's no single solution. It's a complex area of kind of overlapping challenges. However, each of those has solutions. The difficulty we have is we don't have we have the collaboration from community partners like yourselves. The city's now kind of stepping up in terms particularly of the housing piece, and with the housing secretariat, we can get into that a little bit more if you like. But we don't have the order of magnitude of support from the other orders of government that we need to really solve this crisis. And that's one of the things I think that is clear. The city budget, we invested almost $200 million in this most recent budget, which was up from the last budget, on housing and homelessness, because we need to. I mean, we can't have people in that state without trying to make a difference, and we can't have people who are concerned about the impacts on community and on the business districts, not see any solutions at all being implemented either. And so the investment's important, but it's nowhere near enough. And the property tax base can't continue to support all of the pieces that are needed to really solve the crisis that we're in. And so we continue to advocate. You do, we do as a city, lots of different agencies and organizations do as well.
Yeah, the solution to this is not, as you said, one level of government. It's really us working together. I know that what we've seen in our own organization is that when different levels of government come together, they can truly make a difference. And we've seen that in the past. We've been able to provide supportive housing to well over 1,600 individuals and households, both in Hamilton, Toronto, and Niagara. And what we've seen is that when you give a person a home, a job or some meaningful activity, and you give them a friend or meaningful relationships, that things can change. And I think that those are some of the things that we want to work with. I think as we've seen some struggles in our economy and the building industry, one of the opportunities here is for governments to step forward and build affordable housing. Put the money into keeping jobs in the trades, because we don't want to lose those skills. And we also have an opportunity now to take advantage of a lower market in terms of building that new housing so that people can have a place to call home. And that's not just about those who find themselves homeless. As you well know, housing is for everyone, and people need to turn around and have something that's affordable. We as an organization are just beginning to look at workforce housing, because we know that if we're going to have a workforce that we can't adequately reimburse, they're going to need to find housing that's going to be affordable for them. We can't have our staff living in cars or thinking that they're not sure they're going to have a place to live tomorrow, and expect them to come in and care for the people that we are so privileged to serve each day.
That's really, it's great. I didn't realize that you were doing that, and that's actually it's really the next step as an organization. But you're correct in terms of the opportunity right now, and the collapse of the condo market, if you will. One of the things we're seeing in Hamilton is that some of those projects are converting to purpose-built rental. And so we've had a dearth of purpose-built rental units in our city for a very, very long time. So one of the outcomes of this crisis in terms of the building market, or the housing building market that we have, is that we're getting some of the types of housing that we've needed for a long time actually being built in our city. But the supportive piece is also so very important. And, I just want to say that one of the things that I've always valued about the Good Shepherd, and it speaks to the kind of the topics we already talked about in terms of stigmatization writ large, but you're an organization that meets people where they're at. And so you create that trust, those relationships, that sense of community and belonging that are so important for people to begin, a better journey, or a different journey, one that's the better for them in many ways. And I just want to say I do appreciate that. It's extremely, extremely important. That dignity, that relationship building is so important.
Yeah, the question of dignity in particular, I think that, and you're right, not just in Hamilton, but across the country and in communities all over the world. In fact, the issue of homelessness has become one that gets personalized. It's almost a moral failing of the person who's experiencing it. So moving beyond that and looking at how we build vibrant communities that are inclusive and equitable, and where everybody lives with a greater degree of safety, is really important. I wonder, what are your thoughts about how to more robustly engage diverse opinions around this issue, how to build more coalition for better outcomes?
Well, I mean, that's actually a really good question. And, we always say we need to educate folks. But the housing crisis and the housing affordability crisis and homelessness is not new. It's been around for a very, very long time. And it's certainly at proportions that we've not seen in Hamilton for decades and decades. But the opportunity, I think, is now to create more of a kind of a connection in places where maybe we haven't done that in the past. And so I worry a little bit, because the acuity of folks who are suffering right now is quite high, and so sometimes behaviors are quite difficult, and so people who don't have any kind of exposure or experience in encountering those situations, fear is the first thing. And so we're having a community conversation about exactly that, about safety, perception of safety, et cetera, et cetera. I think that the opportunity exists, but it's one that it's a tough nut to crack. I'm going to be honest with you. It's really hard to get people from being fearful, for example, of going to certain parts of our city, to being empathetic about what happens. But I'm really glad that you talked, Brother Richard, about the about seniors, the number of seniors that we're seeing on the streets and unhoused, and that's something I first noticed a couple years ago when I was touring around in Ottawa, and it's devastating to see, people who have built their lives in our city, for example, in our community, who have raised kids, have grandkids, et cetera, who are now unable to put a roof over their head and are part of a group of people who is growing, as we know, that are unhoused, and that's. I mean, it says something about the failure of our systems, and that's, I think, the other big piece. When we talk about solutions, we're not here by accident. There have been a number of failures over the years, a number of changes in public policy that have brought us to the place that we're at. It's kind of going back to how long we've known each other, Brother Richard. It's kind of like a long, awful train wreck that we've been watching coming down the track for a couple of decades, and now we're there. We're on the crash scene, and it's really hard to pull back from that.
Yeah, I think as I reflect on sort of my history of working with in this city and working with the poor of those who've come to our doors, it's somehow or another the message of pay now or pay later doesn't seem to go forward. And we continue to try to put Band-Aids on emergency situations, but really what we need to do is invest in people and invest in their supports that will keep them out of other parts of government. And one of the things that people keep talking about in healthcare, we talk about ALCs, or alternative level of care, the number of elderly people that are taking up acute care beds in hospital. Then we talk about the number of people that we're putting in jails and prisons. And then we see visibly the number of people on the streets. But if we took some of those resources and said, we're going to invest in you in a different way, we can, in fact, make a difference. And we can improve a lot of folks. The challenges are so often, as you said, they're that train wreck that's been going on for a long time. Some of this started way back when we said the deinstitutionalization, and we never turned around and created support programs in the community.
Yeah.
We never provided the opportunities to build safe, affordable housing. Even just when we look at housing now, we recognize that we have to build in such a way that that person can age in their unit, because they often will not get into a long-term care facility. They may not have the resources to do that. And we're going to turn around and have to figure out a way to care for people as they age, particularly those that we have in our services who so often age prematurely because of some of their lifestyles or because of some of their comorbidities that are occurring in their lives.
It does strike me that sometimes we don't look and value the successes that we've forged in this community. Hamilton has a richness of responses to people who are in crisis. And if I look at, for example, our homes program, supportive housing for people living with mental illness and people who have lived 10, 20 plus years with us and are aging in place, or more recently, Dorothy Day, where 73 units of affordable supportive housing for women who literally came right out of a shelter that was serving chronically homeless women with complex needs. And they continue to live there and thrive. And Good Shepherd is not the only organization in this community doing this work, but I think sometimes we get overwhelmed by the magnitude of the issues we're facing, and we fail to reflect that maybe we have some of the solutions. We're just not replicating them, or in fact, measuring what the economies and efficiencies that are created by them. So you've referenced cost to healthcare, cost to policing, cost to incarceration. These are massive costs, and the solutions actually aren't that costly when we get right down to it.
No, absolutely. Can I just say thank you? Because the other thing that Good Shepherd has stepped up to do is operate the temporary outdoor shelter down on Tiffany Barton. And I just want to say you do such a great job. You provide such great leadership, Catherine. That I think people need to know that that is a success story. Notwithstanding, there were some challenges in terms of the procurement, and we've addressed that as a city. And the federal government came in with $5 million to assist with that that situation. But the bottom line is, it's successful. People are finding pathways forward that they didn't have before. People are becoming permanently housed. People are getting their government papers that help them then to do other things in terms of various benefit programs, healthcare, all of those pieces. People are getting healthcare. People are getting mental health supports. They're taking their meds. I mean, these are the things that people don't see, but they're making a big, big difference for individuals who would otherwise continue to be literally on our streets, and that's so that's something I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for. Apparently, though, there's a new study that's just come out that speaks to exactly that, the quantification of those investments that could be better utilized and will go farther with housing, putting it into housing and supports rather than emergency wards, paramedics, police, all of those pieces that are, jails that are so expensive. But if you take all of those dollars and the pressure off of those systems, because that's the other thing that happens, those systems are also under great, great pressure, and you divert that to the kinds of programs that do the work that Dorothy Day does, and that the Barton Tiffany does, and that so many other providers are doing, you have better outcomes all the way around for people, for the organizations and agencies, and for the taxpayer.
Yeah, it's not always a straight line, but that kind of innovation can be really, really important. And Barton Tiffany is an example where the folks who go and stay in that shelter are straight out of encampments, often have not had much contact with the traditional shelter system, and the outcomes are astonishing. Very low number of emergency responses required there, very low number of drug poisonings compared to other shelters in the community there. And the housing outcomes are really quite astonishing, which doesn't mean there aren't massive challenges around affordability and access to housing stock and so on. But we're seeing great things, and it reinforces. Thank you for saying that, because the team there is doing an amazing job. The people who live there are amazing. And it really demonstrates that if we're prepared to take a risk and try something a little different, built on our prior learnings, we can get really effective outcomes. So that partnership with the city is tremendously important to drive that kind of work.
Absolutely.
Organizations like ourselves have been on the front lines every day. What role do you think social services can play as we move forward to meet some of these challenges in our community, particularly in terms of the opioid crisis, particularly in terms of some of the challenges that we're facing with homelessness and affordability in housing?
Well, I would say right off the hop that you play an integral part already. So it's not what you can do; it's what you already are doing. And I think it speaks to one of the things that was mentioned around, the level of or the size of the crisis that we're in right now, because the investments are not equal to the crisis that we're facing. And so the kinds of programs that we've just talked about, the kinds of opportunities to prevent people from taking unawares toxic drugs that end up in naloxone situations or worse. So these are things that oftentimes people say, well, that's not the right thing to do. But I would say this: what you have taught me is that you meet people where they are and you help them from there. And if people are still actively using drugs, then helping them to do that more safely, and then giving them then pathways for social supports, for mental health supports, for addiction services, for counseling, for housing. All of those things come after they're still alive. And this is, I think, a big controversial conversation in our community. And it goes back to, Brother Richard, what you were saying about how do we educate people? How do we build better bridges for people to understand what's really happening out there? And one of the things I think that you could speak to better than I, but people don't necessarily, end up in a place where their only out is substance use. Oftentimes, that senior that you're talking about, that that was okay until they got run evicted, is now on the street, doesn't know what to do. Next thing you know, they're trying to find ways to deal with their destitution, and unfortunately, we know the results of that sometimes means drug use, right? And that's hard to get out of once it starts. But that's not every situation. Granted, not every, but it's tragic to see what's happening.
I read some stuff around where does some of the original drug use issues begin, and often it ends up, particularly with regards to men, it begins when somebody has an accident at work.
Mm-hmm.
And they're a laborer or they're working for a union and they have an accident. And then what happens is they see medical treatment, they get on Oxycontins or other types of pain relief, and then somebody decides that they need to stop that and they don't have an alternative. Yeah. And unfortunately, that then becomes that downward spiral where somebody ends up on the streets, seeking the drugs that will give them relief, and really facing them into a life of desperation, a life of struggle, a life that requires them to often do things that they wouldn't have done in the first place. I think people need to recognize each and every day we see those stories, we've heard those stories where people start with a simple workplace injury and then it gets worse and worse and worse.
I've talked to folks like that in some of the spaces that I've been in my previous role. That's exactly the story that folks tell. It's either a workplace accident or a motorcycle accident or a car accident or something unexpected that happens that literally turns life upside down. And it's a terrible thing. But as I was coming here to this conversation, there was a young man on the corner of downtown who was bent over and crooked, and his sign said "injured" and "I can't work." He was bent over, and his body was askew. He obviously has a serious spinal injury, but this is where he is, and the other piece of it is where the access to medical care that can help address some of the trauma that they've had is also a big piece, right?
For sure, and treatment that gives people the opportunity to abstain and to get sober if that's what they choose to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It occurred to me that I was in a meeting this morning with the coordinator of our Lived Experience Advisory, which is a group of people who have used our services or similar services in the community who advise us on how to be responsive and respectful and to do better work. And they were talking about how to become more engaged in the community, how they could use their voices and their hands differently. And this is something we also hear from people who live in this building and in other Good Shepherd programs about how they know things and they want to be heard. And I think some of them might listen to this and would be interested to know what your thought is about how people can become more engaged citizens in Hamilton.
I think that the best thing for people to do is to look around and see where the need is, because there's a lot of need and there's a lot of skills. People in Hamilton have a lot of skills. Coincidentally, I was just at a volunteer appreciation event on the weekend for people who volunteer for city programs, everything from sports to environment to senior supports, etc. There's a lot of people that have a lot to offer. There's also a lot of people who have a lot to offer who've offered it all through their lives and aren't necessarily engaged anymore. They've retired, for example. They've changed jobs but really love what they used to do. Or they have time on their hands for whatever reason. That's the opportunity that we have. We have such a richness in our community, and we have a lot of heart. I mean, Hamilton traditionally is a place where we look after one another. We stand up for each other. And giving people a moment to have a look at what's happening out there, and then take that moment and reflect: is there something I can offer? What can I do? Are there things that I can contribute? And I would bet 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. And then because of things like the internet, it's not that hard to find organizations and agencies that you might have an affinity with. So whether it's a Dorothy Day, whether it's any of the programs that are run out of here, volunteers really do make the world go round. I've said that for a very long time, and it's the truth. So volunteering, contributing financially, all of those things are so key to the work that's being done in community. But for folks who might feel a little bit hesitant, the bottom line is agencies like yours are, wanting you to come. They're wanting you to learn. They're wanting you to give what you can. And it's not something to be fearful of. In fact, it's so fulfilling. And that's what I hear as well. So when I go to the Christmas dinners that you put on for people in Hamilton, people who are there volunteering, they experience a sense of joy. Like they experience a sense of joy for the giving back that they're doing. And that's very enriching for people.
I remember a number of years ago that the Hamilton Community Foundation was involved in a challenge across Canada and the number of volunteers. And we ranked first in terms of the number of people who volunteered. I'd say to you that some of the challenges for agencies like Good Shepherd is that we lost a lot of volunteers during COVID.
I know.
And we really want people to come back. And I think that's a really important message today, that people can give of their time and their talents to be agencies like Good Shepherd. There are many agencies, as you said, that they can make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah, they absolutely can. And that's a good point about the what happened with COVID. That's a really good point. They made so many changes in so many ways to how we experience life here in our city and elsewhere. But a good point to kind of encourage those folks to come back because they make a big difference.
As you're moving forward and as a city, what do you think some of the biggest challenges are going to be as into the future in meeting some of the ongoing pressures of running a municipality this large? And addressing the needs that are vast, and we're seeing lots of development. We're seeing an LRT. We're seeing a variety of things going on in our community, but we also need to turn around and deal with some of the social, the elderly issues, the meeting the needs of our community. We've done a lot, but what are some of the barriers as we move forward?
That's a really great question. I want to say first and foremost, you're right. It's a very complex city, and there's lots of moving parts and many things happening all at the same time. There are some system problems that we need to try to get some action from the other orders of government. And I know people sometimes roll their eyes, there it is, but it's true. And so continuing that advocacy, not just as a single voice as a city, but all cities do that. Big city mayors do that. There's just lots of organizations, but individual organizations like the Good Shepherd, like the YW, like Indwell. all of these folks, all of you partners in community are singing from the same songbook as we are with the other orders of government. And it's the funding for affordable housing, supportive housing, transitional housing, but it's also the underlying pieces, income supports. People's incomes are not able to support them. And you made the point, Brother Richard, earlier on about even people who are working, people who work here might not be able to afford to rent a unit in the regular market. So there's the housing piece, but there's also the underlying pieces around ability for people to earn enough money in our economy, and or if they have a disability or unable to work on ODSP or social assistance to be able to survive. That's a big piece of it as well, income levels. And those kinds of things, income redistribution belongs on the income tax system, not on the property tax system. But speaking of the property tax system, the other challenge that we have as a city is that we lost a lot of our industrial base, right? A lot of industries shut down and walked away after free trade, et cetera. We're now rebuilding. A big part of the challenge is when we lost those companies, we had all kinds of infrastructure that the commercial industrial sector was helping us pay for. When their taxes left, and they pay higher taxes generally than residential, that revenue left the city as well. So we're left with a lot of infrastructure that used to be funded that has to now be spread along the residential taxpayer instead of residential and commercial industrial. So we're attracting a lot of new investments, a lot of new businesses, trying to get that inequitable situation balanced out a little bit better. But those are things that take some time. I mean, we also have such great assets with McMaster University and Mohawk College, and we have Redeemer, we have all kinds of talent and skill and opportunity. What we want to do is make sure that those young people coming out of those institutions, those higher education places, are able to afford to live here, are able to work here, and are able to contribute to our community. And so there's all of those pieces. And then, of course, I'm proud of the city's work thus far on the housing secretariat piece, because one of the things that I found when I arrived as mayor is that we really had no infrastructure at the city to be the partner that organizations like yours need to be able to have an add-on in terms of the impact of what you do. And so the housing secretariat creates that place where all of the programs they sit, where the city funds money into housing fund to then partner with you, where our surplus properties, where our city-owned land can be a part of the solution for providers like yourselves and others. And so for me, this is it's a practical solution, something different, something new. But what I'm hearing from providers is it's actually working. It's making a difference. And what I hear from government is that because we're doing that, we have very reliable data, and we have pathways for the money to flow and for the partnerships to be very clear. What we need now, though, is the money from the other orders of government to make those partnerships really thrive.
What do you think the city, or what can residents expect over the next year in this community?
What do residents expect?
Yeah.
Well, they expect their potholes to be fixed. They expect their roads to be made better. It's interesting because what I find is that it's often the very practical things when you talk to residents about kind of what they expect from their city. It takes a little bit to get to some of the other pieces that we're talking about today. But I would say in the next year, they would want to see some solutions around the crisis that we're facing. They would rather see people being housed and people not being in crisis in the community than see them. I mean, so you know what I mean? And I don't mean that in a nasty way, like, they don't want to be seen, but they want to see people able to overcome some of the challenges, some of the crisis that they're facing, and that's the job, I think, in front of all of us.
I so appreciate you saying that, because I think this conversation around homelessness and the attendant issues is so polarized, and I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that people who are not so burdened are not necessarily against people who are struggling, but rather want to see everybody do well. And I think that's a great approach to take, that we want to live in a community where everybody can thrive, and that takes a community to build. So I appreciate that perspective.
Yeah.
We started our conversation today with me talking about how long ago you and I began to work together. You started as a housing advocate, a community development person.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, or what has that work and your work in politics taught you over the years about this community?
I think that one of the big things it's taught me is that Hamilton, as a hardworking, working class community, has a lot of examples to show around success, but also a lot of indicators of when things aren't working. And we have both of those things in Hamilton, and have over the years. We have innovators in this space like yourselves. We also have challenges in terms of growing need. But I do. One of the things I find, I'm going to be honest about it, a little bit frustrating, is that going back to the solutions conversation, as a person that was a housing advocate for a very long time, my first private members bill in the legislature was about, tenants' access to utilities and essential utilities. And so it's something that's in my blood and always has been. Affordable housing. I worked in the not-for-profit housing sector before I went to McQuestion. So it's knowing that housing really is the key. I mean, really, housing is the key. Housing that meets your needs, housing that supports you if you need supports, housing that's stable, housing that's accessible if you need accessible housing, all of those things. Housing that helps you age in place, which is a growing situation that we have now demographically in terms of our aging population. And so how hard is that? It shouldn't be this hard. After all those decades, Brother Richard, it shouldn't be that hard.
No, we've studied it to death.
Yeah.
We just need to get on. What keeps you motivated?
People. I mean, I got involved in politics by accident. Some of my former friends from high school, you were never on the debating club. No, I wasn't. In fact, I was very shy, and I didn't want to, do any public speaking whatsoever, even through university. But I got involved politically because of people, because of housing, because of downloading of housing to the municipal level. And that's where I started. I started at municipal council when it comes to the politics part. But it's people that keep me motivated, because people really do have great hearts, and people really do want to see better for everyone, as Catherine's saying. And I believe that to be true. And I know that the solutions are there. And so I stay motivated, because I feel like if I wasn't motivated, I wouldn't be myself. Like, it wouldn't be me. And so, sometimes I say I have a serious personality disorder, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's a disorder at all. I think it's actually how I was built, how I was made, and I'm proud of my passion, and it hasn't waned yet.
Well, thank you for your passion. Our guests today have been Her Worship Andrea Horwath, the Mayor of the City of Hamilton, and Catherine Kalinowski, the Chief Operating Officer of Good Shepherd. I'm Brother Richard McPhee. Thank you for listening to The Fold. Have a great day.